Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
There's a specific kind of silence that hits right after a sentence slices through a room like a hot knife through butter, and when my mother raised her glass and delivered those 11 goddamn words, finally, a child who didn't disappoint me. You could feel the air suck itself out of the room like someone had just opened a vacuum seal on my entire childhood. I sat there, plastered smile nailed across my face, nodding along like a bobblehead strapped to a landmine, while every single person at that long candlelit dinner table tried to pretend they hadn't just heard her detonate decades of quiet war in front of the prime rib. To be clear, I didn't flinch. I didn't say a word. I sipped my wine like it didn't taste like blood. I let the red bloom across my cheeks without wiping it, and I clapped when everyone else clapped, even though my palms felt like they'd split open from the pressure. It wasn't shock. It wasn't even pain, really. It was more like confirmation that no matter how old you get, no matter how many jobs you hold, bills you pay, favors you do, or holidays you show up to with that tight, polite smile, you can still be the disappointment in the family photo. That night had been weeks in the making, and everyone had a role. Jake, of course, the golden boy, was the center of attention in his new gray suit with the sleeves just a little too long, probably borrowed, probably still not paid off. Sarah, his bride-to-be, was glowing in that way women glow when they still think they're about to marry into something special. My mom was holding court like always, eyeing the room like a proud queen whose dynasty had finally secured itself a proper heir. And then there was me, third chair from the end, seated conveniently out of view from the main speeches, tucked behind a centerpiece of hydrangeas I'm pretty sure was taller than my career. You'd think this was the first time something like this happened, but no, this wasn't some shocking outburst. It was just the first time she'd said it loud enough for the wine guy to hear. See, growing up, I was the kid who got decent grades and never caused a scene. I didn't crash cars, I didn't skip school, and I never once got caught sneaking out at night because I never tried. I went to a state school because I knew it wouldn't bankrupt us, graduated without asking for a dime, and paid my own student loans on time every single month. Jake, on the other hand, that man has been bailed out more times than a fishing net. He dropped out of college twice, once because he said the professors were too liberal, and once because he needed to find himself, which apparently involved 3 months in Arizona selling essential oils and crashing on a yoga instructor's couch. But you know what? He got a parade every time he came home. Mom would cook his favorite meals, talk about how brave he was for trying new things, and complain about how unfair the world was to boys like him. Meanwhile, when I came home for the holidays, she'd ask me why I still wasn't dating anyone or if I was going to settle down soon before it's too late. Like I was some carton of milk on the edge of expiration. The worst part? I accepted it. For years, I swallowed that crap like communion wafers, convinced it was just family and that love doesn't always look like you want it to. I remember one Thanksgiving, Jake showed up late and high. Yeah, high. Like visibly, audibly stoned out of his mind. He ate all the mashed potatoes, knocked over a bottle of wine, and passed out on the couch before dessert. Mom covered him with a blanket and said, "He's just tired, poor thing." I offered to help with the dishes. She handed me a trash bag. So, no, this wasn't new. This was just the moment it all crystallized. This was the moment when every second of quiet bitterness hardened into something sharp. When she raised that glass and made her little jab in front of 30 people, I didn't just hear an insult. I heard the truth she'd been hinting at my entire life, spoken plain, with the kind of cold smugness only a mother who knows she'll never be challenged can deliver. But what she didn't know, what Jake didn't know, was that I'd been watching. I'd been listening. I had receipts. And not just metaphorical ones. Literal, ink-on-paper receipts that would crack this whole polished dinner party into rubble. Because Jake's little engagement ring, the one that had Sarah squealing like a reality show contestant when he got down on one knee at the vineyard last weekend, that ring came with a price tag. And guess who paid it? 2 months ago, Jake called me just to catch up, which should have been the first red flag, because Jake only calls when he's about to ask for something. He said he was in a rough spot, between jobs again, some startup collapsed, or maybe the manager was a dick. I don't know, I stopped listening after the fifth excuse. He said he needed a little boost, a small loan, just to keep afloat. He told me he was trying to be better, trying to take responsibility, that Sarah meant the world to him, and he didn't want to mess it up. It was the first time in years I'd heard him sound halfway sincere, and maybe that's what got me. I sent him $3,000. No questions asked. Just like that. Because despite everything, despite knowing he'd probably never pay me back, I wanted to believe. I wanted to believe that maybe this time, he was finally doing something right. That maybe love had changed him. That maybe I could stop being the bitter sibling and finally be the helpful one. But now, sitting there in that over-decorated restaurant with its overpriced centerpieces and tacky personalized menus, listening to my mother toast to her one good child, I realized the joke wasn't just on me, it was written by me, produced by me, and funded with my own goddamn money. And still, I didn't stand up. Not yet. Because payback? That's a dish best served after the main course. 2 months before the engagement dinner, I got a call from Jake on a random Tuesday evening, and even before I answered, I already knew something was off, because Jake never calls unless he's circling a favor like a shark that smells blood in the water, and sure enough, his voice was syrupy sweet and overly grateful, like a guy who's already drafted the apology he plans to send after screwing you over. He said he was in a bit of a bind, which is Jake's go-to phrase when he's burned every bridge within a 50-mile radius and needs someone else to throw down the planks again. This time, he claimed he'd been laid off from some marketing job I didn't even know he had, something about downsizing, corporate restructuring, whatever excuse was trendy that week. He said he was trying to keep his head above water, that things were finally lining up with Sarah, and that if he could just stay on his feet a little longer, he could get to where he needed to be. He didn't say exactly where that was, of course. Jake never does. He speaks in vague dreams and half-promises, always hinting at the future, but never explaining the path. He said he needed just a few grand, nothing crazy, not alone, just a little help from family, and it was the way he said family that hooked me, like he was daring me to say no. I wired him $3,000 later that night, without hesitation, and I didn't even tell anyone. Not a friend, not a coworker, not even my therapist. I didn't do it for praise. I didn't do it to be the better sibling. I did it because part of me still clung to the sad little hope that maybe this time he meant it, that maybe if I just gave a little more, one day someone in my family might actually remember I was there. That maybe, just maybe, I could buy my way into being visible. And look, I know how that sounds. Pathetic. Delusional. But when you grow up always being the fallback option, always the plan B, you start thinking that if you're just useful enough, just dependable enough, people might start choosing you on purpose instead of by default. That was the fantasy I bought into for 30-some years, and Jake? He played that role so well he should have gotten an Oscar, or at the very least, a punch in the throat. The irony hit a few weeks later. I was scrolling through Sarah's Instagram story, because of course they'd announced the engagement on social media before even calling half the family, and there she was, beaming with her hand held up like she'd just won the Super Bowl, showing off this shiny little diamond ring with the caption, "He made all my dreams come true." At first, I was just going to scroll past, maybe text a polite congratulations and go back to whatever frozen dinner I'd half-burned. But something caught my eye, something about the box. It was from a boutique jeweler downtown. A place Jake couldn't afford on his best day. That itch in the back of my skull turned into a full-blown scream by the end of the night. I pulled up my banking app, stared at the date I'd sent the money, and realized it lined up perfectly with the engagement photos Sarah had posted from the weekend getaway. I called the store the next morning pretending to be Jake, said I needed a copy of my receipt for insurance purposes, and the woman on the phone was all too happy to oblige. When the PDF hit my inbox, I sat there, staring at the line item like it had slapped me across the face. $3,000. Not a penny more. Not a penny less. He hadn't even tried to disguise it. He used my money, exactly my money, to buy the ring. No side hustle, no savings, no sacrifice. Just a wire from me to him, and then a rock on Sarah's finger. And here's where I made the stupidest comment of all to a coworker the next day, something I now realize is going to bite me when this story goes public. I sent him $3,050 because he said the ring cost $4,000. I figured 50% was fair. I know. It's not. $3,050 isn't 50% of $4,000. It's not even close. It's like, what, 75%? I could do the actual math, but frankly, I'm too pissed to care. Let someone in the comments correct me. I'm sure they will. Hell, I hope they do. But math aside, what really burned wasn't just the money. It was the betrayal wrapped in entitlement. Jake didn't ask if he could use the money for a ring. He didn't tell me. He knew deep down, without question, that I'd never confront him, never rock the boat, never spoil the fantasy that he was finally stepping into his role as the family's crown prince. And Sarah? I honestly don't think she had a clue. I'd introduced them at my birthday party last year, not that either of them mentioned that little fact in their engagement story. But I remember it. I remember how Jake asked who she was after the second round of drinks, how he suddenly took an interest in helping me refill the chips, how he laughed just a little too hard at her jokes. I was just the middleman. Again. So, I did what I always do. I kept my mouth shut. I clapped at the engagement announcement. I liked the post. I bought a gift off their registry like a good little disappointment. But inside, something shifted. The silence I'd always worn like armor started to feel suffocating. And as I stared at that receipt, the total burned into my brain like some twisted invoice for a performance I never agreed to fund. I realized something simple, something cold, something permanent. This wasn't just about money. It was about worth. And they were about to find out just how much mine cost. Some families run on tradition, some on guilt, and some, like mine, run on delusion so thick it could be ladled into bowls and served with crusty bread. And in our family, the biggest lie we ever swallowed was the story of Jake, the golden boy, the second coming. The fixer, the survivor, the one who could do no wrong no matter how loudly the evidence screamed otherwise. It started young, earlier than I even realized at the time, little things like how when Jake failed his first driving test, because he forgot to stop at a red light, Mom said the instructor must have had a vendetta or had been too harsh on him. Probably didn't like boys, or had something personal against our family, as if the Department of Motor Vehicles was secretly plotting against the success of her little prince. Meanwhile, when I passed my driving test on the first try, she barely looked up from her crossword and said, "Well, that makes sense. You always were better at following rules." That's how it always went. If I succeeded, it was because that's what I was supposed to do. If Jake stumbled, it was the world being unfair or cruel or somehow blind to his potential. And my God, the word potential became a sort of hymn in our house, whispered like a prayer every time he crashed and burned through another job, another relationship, another opportunity that someone else would have killed to get. Our dad left when I was 15 and Jake was 12, and from that day on, it was like someone flipped a switch in Mom's head and she rewrote the family script from scratch. In this new version, Jake wasn't just the youngest, he was the man of the house, the protector, the brave little soldier doing his best in a world that had broken his home. Me? I was the responsible one. The helper. The background music that played while everyone cried over the lead actor's monologues. I picked up groceries, got a part-time job my junior year of high school, learned how to reset the router every time the internet went down because Jake has homework and it's more important, even though he hadn't turned in a single assignment in 3 weeks. I remember when I got into college, nothing fancy, just a solid state school with a decent communications program, and I was over the moon because I'd done it without any tutoring, without any help. Just long nights and black coffee and library time squeezed in between shifts at the gas station. I told Mom, expecting maybe a hug, maybe a tear, something, anything, and all she said was, "Are you sure you're not rushing it? What about taking a year off like Jake? You're always so intense." That word stuck with me like gum on the bottom of my shoe. Intense. Like ambition was something to be ashamed of. Jake flunked out of college twice. Once for partying too hard, once for not feeling inspired. Both times, Mom took him to lunch, brought him home, made his favorite casserole, and said, "Some people just take a different path." She said it like he was hiking a mountain while the rest of us were stuck on a treadmill, but all I saw was a guy lounging in a hammock someone else bought and tied up for him. Years later, when I bought Mom a brand new washer after hers died mid-cycle and flooded the laundry room, I didn't expect fireworks. I didn't expect her to bow in gratitude. I just wanted her to not pretend it came from Jake. But sure enough, I overheard her on the phone with Aunt Linda saying, "Jake helped me get a new washer. He's just so thoughtful." Jake didn't even know what brand it was. He wouldn't know a water inlet valve from a cheese grater. But he got the credit anyway, because in Mom's eyes, that's just how the world works. He tries, so he deserves. The older I got, the more invisible I became in her eyes. Birthdays came and went with half-hearted cards. She'd forget my work milestones, but memorize Jake's every haircut and resume tweak like it was sacred scripture. One year, I flew her out to visit me for the holidays. I paid for her flight, bought a new guest bed, made homemade meals every night, and what did she say when she got home? Jake wanted to fly me out too, but he said he couldn't get the time off. He always thinks of me. That phrase hit like a slap made of ice. Thinks of me. Not did something. Just thought. Apparently, in her eyes, thinking counts more than doing. I started planning the engagement dinner payback about 2 weeks before the big night. After I saw the receipt, after I counted the days between his lie and that sparkly proposal, I stopped waiting to be noticed and started writing my own lines into the family script. I called the restaurant where they'd booked the dinner, some pretentious place with linen napkins and one of those chalkboard menus that acts like putting farm to table in front of every item makes it gourmet. I asked to speak to the manager. Told him I'd like to cover dessert for the party. I didn't tell anyone. Just slid my credit card across the phone line and smiled. Why dessert? Because it was going to be the only sweet thing they'd taste that night. I wasn't going to flip tables or throw wine or scream like the jilted villain in a holiday movie. I wanted to do this calmly, elegantly, sharply, like a scalpel. Just one clean incision across the fantasy. And so I made one final request. I asked for a microphone. "Just a few minutes," I said. "Just a little toast for my brother." 5 minutes, maybe less. They didn't even hesitate. Said it was already part of the night's flow. Said it'd be set up right before dessert. Perfect. Because in 5 minutes, I was going to set fire to 30 years of bullshit. And I wasn't planning to bring a bucket. There's a strange kind of calm that settles in right before you burn everything down, not the panicked kind that tightens your throat or makes your hands shake, but the eerie, floating kind. The one that feels like your entire body knows exactly what's coming and still chooses to walk right into it. And that was exactly how I felt the moment the server brought out the champagne and the mic stand was rolled into the center of the room like some ceremonial weapon. The dinner had been a blur of fake laughs and polite clinking forks, small talk about real estate and destination weddings, and Sarah's Pinterest board that apparently now had an entire section titled Engagement Chic, whatever the hell that meant. My mother was glowing like she had finally birthed a legacy instead of 2 human beings with vastly different returns on investment. She made her speech with the kind of soft venom only practiced mothers of grown children can master, the kind where every compliment is really a knife polished to a mirror shine. And every anecdote is carefully picked to remind the room that she raised one success and one footnote. She talked about Jake's perseverance, his charm, his natural leadership since the days when he was in Little League. Never mind that he struck out every game and quit after 2 weeks because the uniform made his arms itch. She gave this sweet little smile when she got to the end and said those now infamous words, "Finally, a child who didn't disappoint me." There was polite laughter, nothing too loud, just the kind of nervous chuckle people give when they don't want to be the only one not in on the joke. My chest didn't burn this time. I'd already built the fire. I stood up slowly, glass in hand, letting the room see me for the first time that night. Not the background sibling. Not the donor. Not the afterthought. Me. The one who paid for the damn ring. I smiled like it was just another toast. Another cheerful moment, and I waited until the room hushed again. It took about 3 seconds. "Funny toast, Mom," I said, my voice calm and smooth like I was reading off a dinner menu. "Hilarious, actually. Because this child who didn't disappoint you proposed, with a ring I paid for." Silence. Not dramatic silence. Not movie silence. Real silence. The kind where even the silverware gets self-conscious. A fork clinked against a plate somewhere to my right. One server stopped mid-pour, his bottle of Chardonnay hovering in the air like he'd just heard the word lawsuit whispered behind him. My brother, Jake, blinked like someone had flashed a camera in his face, trying to replay what I said in his head and probably praying it meant something else. It didn't. I let the words hang there like a chandelier with the screws already halfway loose. I didn't shout. I didn't curse. I just told the truth, in the most inconvenient way possible. I turned to Sarah, her face still caught somewhere between confusion and the dawning horror of realization, and I added, gently, "And Sarah, honey, if you're curious, here's the receipt." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the folded paper, laid it on the table in front of her like it was a wedding gift wrapped in truth. The room didn't breathe. Sarah picked it up, slowly, the way people pick up eviction notices or test results. She stared at it, then at Jake, then back again. Her hand didn't tremble, which surprised me. She was stronger than I gave her credit for. She didn't scream. She didn't throw her drink. She didn't make a scene. She stood up. She looked at Jake, just looked at him, like she was reading a book she now realized was written by a liar. And then she walked out. No words. No goodbye. Just heels clicking on polished hardwood and the soft brush of her dress as she passed between stunned guests frozen in their cushioned chairs. The sound of her exit was the only real movement in the room for nearly 30 full seconds, until someone coughed, and then nothing again. Jake sat there, mouth open, trying to figure out how to talk his way out of this one, but I knew he couldn't. Not tonight. Not anymore. Mom stared at me with a kind of anger that people usually reserve for war criminals or serial killers, like I had personally ruined her evening, her dream, her narrative that she'd carefully curated and projected onto the world for decades. She didn't say anything at first, but her eyes screamed betrayal, which is a hell of a thing to feel from a woman who hadn't spoken a kind sentence to me in 10 years unless someone else was listening. I raised my glass one more time and said, "To family." Then I sat down. Dessert hadn't even been served yet, but the party was over. You could feel it, the shift, the rupture, the sharp crack down the center of everything that had been festering under smiles and soft focus filters. The tiramisu and creme brulee never even made it out of the kitchen. People started murmuring, some pretending to check their phones, others pretending this wasn't happening at all, but no one said anything directly to me. Not a word. And that silence? That was better than applause. Jake looked like someone had knocked the wind out of him. He mumbled something to Mom, then tried to follow Sarah, but she was already long gone. He rushed out the side door, but I stayed seated. I wasn't chasing anyone. I'd done my part. I didn't do it to be cruel. I did it to be honest. I did it because they'd written me out of the story so many times that it was time I grabbed a pen and wrote something no one could ignore. A single, clean sentence that cracked the whole damn script in half. I sat there, watching my mother's face harden into something I'd never seen before, not disappointment, but disbelief, like she finally realized I wasn't going to play the role she cast for me anymore. And the best part? They never even got to taste the dessert I paid for. Jake ran after Sarah like the world was on fire, and he had just realized he was holding the match. But from where I was sitting, I couldn't tell if it was guilt or panic that pushed him from his chair. Maybe he thought he could explain it away, spin some weak version of the truth, turn it all into some misunderstanding, the way he always did when the truth got too heavy to hold. But for the first time in his golden boy life, he was trying to chase down someone who wasn't going to stick around long enough to let him lie. And Sarah, she didn't run. She didn't scream. She didn't fall into the dramatic trap of making a scene. She just left. Quiet, clean, deliberate. And that silence followed him out the door like a curse that had finally caught up. Mom turned to me with the kind of expression that should be reserved for traitors, murderers, or people who forget to RSVP to Christmas dinner. Her jaw tightened, her hands curled into tight fists around the edges of her linen napkin, and she leaned across the table with a hiss so venomous I half expected the flowers in the centerpiece to wilt. "You've ruined everything," she said, not yelled, said, with that tight-lipped fury only women who believe in appearances more than actual people can deliver. I didn't look away. I didn't flinch. I looked her straight in the eye, and without raising my voice, I said, "No, Mom. You ruined everything. I just told the truth. But that's never been your thing, right?" She blinked once, slow and heavy, like the weight of that sentence physically hit her and her body needed time to register the blow. And then she turned away, back to her wine, back to the polished silver and the cracked facade of her perfect family, as if ignoring me would somehow stitch the moment back together. But it wouldn't. That night had already come apart at the seams. Jake hasn't called me since. Not a text. Not a message. Not even a recycled meme or some half-assed attempt to smooth things over like he's done every time he's blown up his life and needed someone to quietly sweep up the glass. And I don't know if that silence is guilt, shame, or the kind of rage that burns so bright it can't find words. I expected him to try. I expected some version of "I didn't mean for it to happen this way," or "I was going to pay you back," or maybe just "You didn't have to say it like that." But he said nothing, and part of me thinks that silence is the truest thing he's ever given me. Sarah, though, she did reach out. A week later, I got a small cream-colored envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a folded card with simple lettering on the front. "Thank you." Inside, in a clean, steady script, she'd written, "I didn't know. But I think I knew something was off. Thank you for telling me. He cheated on me last year. I forgave him because I thought I could fix it. I needed the push to stop trying. You gave me that. I don't know what happens next, but I'm glad I didn't find out after a wedding. That was it. No drama. No performative gratitude. Just clarity." She saw the truth, and instead of blaming me for the timing or the delivery, she held the mirror up to the real problem. And you know what? That meant something. Not because it made me feel like the hero, I didn't feel like one, but because, for once, someone didn't twist the story to make me the villain. But here's the part one didn't expect. The part one didn't plan for. The quiet that comes afterward? It's not peace. Not entirely. It's more like standing in the ruins of a house that needed to burn, but now that it's ashes, you're left staring at the soot on your own hands, wondering if maybe you loved that place more than you realized. I keep turning the question over in my head late at night like some moral Rubik's Cube I can't quite solve. Did I go too far? Should I have pulled Jake aside privately? Was it revenge? Or was it finally, after years of swallowing glass, just self-preservation? Was it petty? Maybe. Was it cruel? Maybe a little. But was it deserved? Absolutely. Still, the aftermath doesn't come with a parade. There's no confetti in your living room when you finally draw the line in the sand. There's just space. Empty, wide, echoing space. And the longer it stretches, the louder the questions become. Last week, I got a voicemail from Mom. I didn't answer the call. I saw her name flash across my phone while I was folding laundry, and I just watched it ring until it stopped. The message was only 11 seconds long. "You've always been jealous," she said, her voice tight and bitter. "You don't destroy people you love." I didn't delete it. I didn't save it because I wanted to relive it. I saved it because it was proof. Proof that her version of love had always come with conditions. Proof that her love had terms and clauses and fine print so small you didn't even know you'd signed until the bill came due. And for the first time in my life, I stopped paying the price. I've stopped explaining myself. I've stopped trying to win her approval like it's some prize buried in a rigged claw machine. I've started living in the freedom of my own narrative, one where I don't have to sit at the kids' table of emotional validation anymore, begging for scraps of affection wrapped in passive-aggressive compliments. Some nights, I lie awake and replay it all in my head: the dinner, the toast, the sound of Sarah's heels clicking against the tile as she walked out into her own unknown future. And sometimes I wonder if she ever thinks of me, if Jake's tried to twist it all around and paint himself the victim again. Maybe he has. Maybe he hasn't. But it doesn't matter now. Because whatever version they're living in, it's not mine. And in my version, I may not have been the golden child, but I was finally, gloriously, the honest one.